Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. In this podcast, Julienne, Ryan, and I, Jerome DeRoy, discuss ways in which we can create more engagement in our lives, especially at work. There are more people today who identify as disengaged than there are who say they feel engaged at work. We come from Narrative, which is a company that focuses on engaging businesses and their audiences through the power of listening and storytelling. And we do so with a 7-step method. Now, we are only one of many, many people who look at the topic of engagement. And as a result, this is really the reason for being for this podcast. And so we've been inviting lots of different guests to give their perspectives on these topics. And today we have a very special guest. That is Craig Forman. Hi, Craig. How are you?
Hello.
Great. I'm just going to read a little bit of your bio. So Craig is a lead people scientist with Culture Amp, where he both supports organizations to build effective people and culture strategies, along with building the world's largest community of people who believe a better world of work is possible. At the core of his work is a mission to help the world work better by improving the places we work in. He holds a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology and is a proud veteran of the U.S. Air Force. So, Craig, welcome to the show, and hi, Julienne.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, so good to be here. I'm really grateful you asked me to be here and excited to be part.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show. And to kick us off, could you? I know I read your bio, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to do the work that you're doing, especially given the background that you have. It seems like there were different paths taken. So I'm curious how you got to this point in particular.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's part of the story, and that will come out through the day, that it wasn't a straight path. That for me, grew up and my parents split. So there was some adversity early on, which I think is an important part of my journey and dealing with that. And then decided I wanted to go to school and college and didn't have money. So joined the military and spent 4 years in the Air Force. After that, returned and got my undergraduate degree in business. I grew up in Florida. So when I got done with school, the military brought me to California. Loved California. Packed my car, came back to California, and after the military and college, and began kind of figuring it out. And my career, I always was pulled to people and helping. I just loved human potential, both in myself and in others. Did work in higher education, and eventually went back to school and got a master's degree in organizational psychology. And then technology was really picking up. And I think living in the Bay Area to get to technology was a good place to be. It's one of the reasons to be here. And found my way into HR technology, and things the paths started to converge between my passion of people and helping workplaces, like what you read, that purpose of helping the world work better by improving how we work. Eventually got into HR tech, worked in client services, client support, found myself at LinkedIn for a year, and then ultimately Culture Amp, where I've been for the last 5.5 years on our people science team. And in these last 5.5 years, I feel like it all kind of came together and allowed me to really use my skills and my experience and driven by purpose. And it's taken a wild journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about, of what I've been able to do, and that was never scripted or planned. So it's been amazing to work with organizations, but also help build the community and be out in the world, getting to be part of the conferences in this community of people looking to build better worlds of work.
Yeah. I love that purpose, building a better world of work. And I wonder if you can maybe elaborate on the need for that. Like how did that emerge, that we need to build a better world of work? That implies that, something isn't working or was not working. How have you seen tech sort of help that along? And if I'm, hopefully I'm representing that well, but I'm curious about that, and how we get to that vision of a better world of work.
Yeah, well, there's two sides to that question. So let's talk about kind of just the need, and then we'll talk about tech. I think for me, and I think, by the way, I've never been big myself. I'm a builder, not a joiner, and I've built a community, which I think is interesting and bringing people together. And I often would say, I think it came from me, and I share this a lot with people that are building chapters around the world with us, is, build for yourself, build for the world. So at a certain level, I think it started with me just trying to fix what I thought was broken for me and the world. I didn't get, and part of my journey, we can talk more about this, was that I had some, I grew up, I didn't have a lot of money. I had to work all the way through. I had some really bad jobs and I had some really great ones. And I used to say, why are some so bad and why are some so good? And to me, it always felt obvious that in the good ones, it felt like the job was getting done really well. The organization, whatever we're looking to do, got done really well. And people were happy. And I always didn't get that juxtaposition. So that, I think, kind of drove me, and it was what interested me. I've always loved people. There was definitely a merge of my interest in people as well. So I think that kind of drove me a lot. And when I decided to get the master's degree, I couldn't pull the trigger on an MBA, as much as it sounded interesting. The work wasn't calling me. And when I found the organizational psychology program, and it's about facilitation, about organizational design, about test and measurements, about humans, I just felt that I didn't know where that was going to go. And the field was not as big as it is today. But that, I think, is what drove me, this idea that I liked it. I was passionate about it. I thought it fit me well. But the other thing that's really driven me, this idea that it's win-win. It's not just about people. Although I'm pretty, altruistic. I really want to create a world where people are happy at work. But I also saw the flip side that, fine, maybe every executive is not that way. But if we connect the dots and say it's good for business, if people are happy, if people are enjoying what they're doing, if they're feeling fulfilled and feeling their own sense of purpose, people win, the organization wins. It's a win-win. And that always drove me. That was the kind of the business mind with the human side. To your question about technology, and again, maybe this will come up more as we talk, but we're trying to do this at scale, right? A lot of the organizations we're working with we just start working with companies around 50 or 60 and go up into thousands of people. So some of these concepts and the things we're doing work really well. I think we just intuitively know how to do this at 20, 30 people in our families, with our friends. But how do you do it when you have 500 employees? How do we do it at scale? So I think that's where technology comes in. And I think the technology piece can amplify both the shadow in all of us, but also the gold. So that's kind of this balance of how do we leverage technology, because there's a lot of problems, but also there's a lot of good we can do. And how do you listen to 500 people in a snapshot of 2 weeks and take that, quantify it, and turn it into action to your leaders in a quick turnaround? We can only do that with technology. And so that's the beauty of what we can do at scale. But at the same time, there's also a lot of pitfalls and downsides that we have to be aware of and careful about.
Well, just a general impression, just from listening to you the first few minutes, it looks like you took some challenges and you repurposed quite a number as you went on learning journeys to different jobs, and found the gift and found the flip side of what you can do with it. So you were a cultural scientist even before you got the label of a IO psychologist. Yeah.
When I first joined Culture Amp, I had worked my way into client success roles in HR tech. I always wanted to kind of elevate and be more strategic. I joined Culture Amp, and the title was, what was the original title of the role I had? It was some sort of strategist, right? And about 5 or 6 weeks into the role, they said, and there was a bigger team I was part of, they had made a decision that was brewing before I got there, that we were going to change the title to people science, and people were going to be people scientists. And at first I really struggled with that, because I never identified as a scientist. I never thought I wasn't. I see myself as a practitioner, and I was like, I'm going to walk into a room and be a scientist. I've never said that about myself before. So that was an interesting journey. But I think to your point, Julienne, this has been my own personal journey. And I didn't set out to be anything other than, eventually when I got clear, and it took some time of what I wanted to do in the world. And then I was like, okay, if that's what you want to call me. And I realized that when I walk in a room, that gets put on me and I can own it and it works fine. But that was even when you said that, it was an interesting part of my journey, was being put, a label was being put on me that I really had no say about, and having to be okay, what does that mean for me to have a label put on me? And, who am I in the world? And, I guess we do that a lot, right? It goes back to story, how when we tell a story, we use labels, we project, we kind of quantify things. And honestly, I learned how to use it to help me, and it doesn't bother me. I can be a people scientist or a strategist or whatever it is. I just kind of got back to what am I here to do, and not get caught up in the titles of everything, and just keep focused on what's my bigger goal and objective, and that's to help the world work better by improving how we work.
But I think that title gave you a clue. I mean, because people notice something, put labels on it, and it's happened along the way. But all of us hear about we're getting this title given to us, or some adjectives, and we're like, me. But I think it gives us clues to pay attention and teach what we are looking to learn ourselves. So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah.
But that was really cool. The people scientist, that caught my eye when I first saw your bio.
Yeah,
you know, it's interesting.
And I knew it right away. Like, that was really interesting. It was obvious to me pretty quickly that it was a very attractive title to people. I was like, okay, great. I walk in a room and I love things that open doors. So if that opens a door, and I was willing to lean into it and own it, then I would go with that, because it is a door opener, and it's an interesting title, and it piques people's interest. And so I was like, okay. I mean, as long as I'm comfortable with it, and I was in the end.
You know, it's definitely, I'm curious your take on this, or reflection on it, but you've just kind of reminded me of something that I've noticed as a trend over, many, many years. The sort of people function of organizations has gone through many different kinds of iterations, and, which some of which stems from, just organizations getting bigger. And so you have to give different kinds of titles because there's different kinds of roles happening. But, when I was coming up right after business school and had a career in finance, for about 5 years, there was and this was in a very big financial institution with many companies around the world. And I got to travel and all that. But the function that dealt with human dynamics and, was really quite limited, even in the early 2000s, to sort of, not just compliance, but kind of retention, recruitment. There were these kind of big areas, and they didn't really change according to where you were in the world. It's almost like the McDonald's of, of sort of the departments. But then there was a change, and especially in, the last 5-10 years, you're now starting to see these different kinds of roles with different kinds of titles. And so it's interesting that you even went through that, even within a few months of starting at Culture Amp, over the last 5 years, your own title changed, because that's what the time is needing right now. And there seems to be more and more, almost in the moment, tweaking or refinement of like, what is this kind of, people, function in organizations. And I wonder what your take is on that in terms of that evolution. And, have you seen these changes yourself? And maybe you can even tell us about things that you might be excited about that, that we haven't seen ourselves yet as members of the general public, that are kind of coming to fruition in terms of this refinement that I'm talking about, which I think is really important and exciting to me.
Yeah, I think, again, two sides to this question. One is kind of this history and this evolution, and then what's coming and what's exciting. And I think we are beginning a transformation prior to COVID. And I think, and we can talk about this in a minute, about COVID, what COVID has kind of, I think in many ways has done some things that we never would have had the opportunity. But the evolution, I think at a fundamental level, was just really that role. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, and organizations were learning how to scale and grow, you had a lot of like physical labor. So you had a few people that really made decisions, and you needed a lot of people to do work. You needed to consolidate kind of that energy and push it out through a lot of people. But really, you weren't asking for many people to be creative or thinking. You're looking for a lot of like labor. I mean, we're talking about the 50s, the 60s, right? And so you had this human resources function, but it was more of a function that served the executive side. It was hiring, cost, how much do we spend, liability, dealing with legal issues, right? Dealing with unions. So it was a function that I think really supported the executive running of an organization. And I think what's been evolving, and believe me, even since I started, it's amazing when things we talk about today that are so normal. 5 and 6 years ago, some of these diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, even DE&I was a kind of a new term that we don't even think about anymore. I think there is a place for that. I mean, I think there is a reason, and there is a conversation with the CFO about the cost, and that is a function of an organization. But I think what's gone on is realizing that, and you can feel it when you talk to people who've been in the workforce for a while, of this us and them. But some of the more modern organizations that are changing, I think, are really understanding this focus on the people for them, for their sake, development, growth. So I think that's what you're seeing is a shift in attitude of these are just resources of human capital. That how do we protect ourselves from litigation and the downside of all that, too. How do we serve and support humans and develop humans in the best possible way? How do we develop our leaders? How do we think about? So I think these are all stemming from a subtle shift that's been happening around this attention to, if we take care of people, it's good for business, and but fundamentally not as a way to protect ourselves against people, but to invest and support people. What I think with COVID, there's a book called Prime to Perform, which I just love. It's about human motivation, and it talks historically that we've leveraged kind of like financial motivators like your money, status, and one called inertia. And their point is we need to move to play, purpose, and potential. Like these are more important, and they back it in research. But where I'm going with that is that third one on the traditional side around inertia. And I sat with that for a while. And the fact that one of these motivators is just we keep doing things because we've done it a certain way. And inertia is a powerful force, especially when you have an entire system built. It's like an aircraft carrier. And what I think the gift of this, what we went through, at least from an organizational perspective with COVID, is I felt like before there was a lot of talk about the future of work. There's a lot of talk about what could be. There was subtle shift, but I feel like COVID was a handbrake on inertia that we may never happen again. And I feel like we're moving into an opportunity now to rethink everything. And I've worked a lot. We've put on events for senior leaders, and even this past year, so things are emerging. And I think a big theme is leaders in this space used to look to each other to find who has the answer, who has the playbook. Somebody's done this before. And that was the goal, to find somebody that can help you that's done it before. And what's interesting now is so many of those questions, nobody has done it before. And that's that inertia piece. And also an opportunity, but also we could fall into old patterns. But the gift here is that there's no playbooks. Everything's so new. Like remote work, what we thought about remote work 5 years ago is completely different than what we think about it today. Flexibility, adaptability. Like we used to build systems to be like a comprehensive policy for all. And now I think we finally realize we have technology, the ability, the emotional intelligence that's been developed to say, no, you can adapt how you manage, how you treat people. What a 24-year-old worker is looking for in their lives versus a 50-year-old worker are different. And I think we're finally opening, it's not so taboo to think that you can have different ways of handling different people, different opportunities, benefits that could be different for different people. So that really, that excites me. And I also think behind a lot of what I'm talking about is this organizational structure that I think there's been a lot written about, teal organizations or, holacracy. But in that are really the underpinnings of rethinking our hierarchies. And for those that can't see, I'm putting up a triangle, like these hierarchical triangles that we built on, and rethinking, more into circles and where does that belong? Where does it not belong? But fundamentally thinking about restructuring organizations because there's some conflict in how we're designed versus what we're looking to get on output. So I think all of that's happening right now. And a lot of things people talked about are happening. I've stopped using future of work because I feel like it's the now of work,
Oh, one thing came to mind when I was listening to is, we can all have great fun titles and monikers, but it's the depth of the reasoning and the learning and the work that's going on, and to sustain it, not to think you can just put a one size fits all solution. And I think that's more case now, even with lots of buzz about recession, to kind of do a look back to say, look at the patterns that have happened with the workers when we've let people go, what's happened to the next generation when they watch their parents get let go, to learn from that and what made a difference. So to use the historical perspective and not think, oh, that's never going to happen again. So to kind of really be smart about how we engage the cultures and what messages we put out there.
I hear you. And, I'll tell you, something happened in the last few weeks that I think is starting to, it's amazing how quick the buzz has picked up, but I think it's not going away. And that is some of this AI stuff that's happening, particularly with ChatGPT. You can't help but not think about this and see what's going on and realize that I think there's another massive restructure. There are roles and things that are going to change. So that's a big question mark. It came out of nowhere. And I think will dramatically shift a lot of things, a lot of roles, a lot of how we work as artificial intelligence really hits the space, and what kind of roles are going to be impacted about that, and the things that we use humans. So as you're talking, even it just came to my mind of like preparing for a shift and what's going to happen and what does that mean, and to structures and workplaces and how we work.
Yeah. And I would imagine that with Culture Amp, and maybe you could tell us a little more about that too, is the role of data, and you just mentioned AI, and it's true. I mean, the ChatGPT is pretty incredible tool, where suddenly, things that we were doing with AI, just last month have completely changed now. And so I wonder, I guess past experience of, over your time at Culture Amp, but also where you're kind of seeing coming to, like, what are these trends that are coming in terms of the tech, and is there any tension there, because you're thinking about human-centric solutions, right? The things that are good to develop people, et cetera, at scale. Tech is a variety of different things, and so I wonder how you see that and how you kind of navigate that. Maybe there isn't a tension. Maybe that's my word, but but I'm just curious about that, given what you just said about ChatGPT and things are going to change again, and because I know a lot of people are kind of can be very afraid of these kinds of this kind of evolution in terms of AI, and will I still have a job? Will I, whatever, will we still need teachers? Will we, if I take it to an extreme?
Or what will it look like? Look, so it's going to shift. I fundamentally believe that I've always had a lot of faith in human potential, and I think that change is scary, but I also think there'll be some there's roles. What did I hear the other day? Like 80% of the roles in 20 years aren't around today. So like, yes, things are going to change, and it's easy to see what we might lose, but I think there's also the side of what's going to shift and change, and what are the roles of tomorrow. So the change is going to be hard. I think I like the word you say about tension. I think is really, I like it, because there is a tension in technology. When I was thinking about prepping for this, and that idea of technology, and that idea of like technology, I think, like I said in the beginning, amplifies both our shadow sides and our golden sides. And it's easy to call out the shadow stuff, and we can see it. You can see, the brilliance of open communication. At the same time, look at some of the stuff we've seen with so much mass communication, these two sides. But I don't know that I would change it. It's kind of amazing too, because of the kind of communities that can be built, the way people can connect. And the fear is a funny thing, because I think that some fear in some ways is healthy, because it keeps us aware. And like, if we're not fearful, all the bias and all the issues that make it bias. But at the same side, if too much fear can paralyze us, or have us do some things that are not, like, are self-serving and hurting others, because we're just trying to be self-preservation. But I think it's reasonable. And when you said that fear of some of the things, I hope everybody holds a little bit of fear, because that keeps us aware of what the possibility. And there are a lot of problems when, if bias gets built, if a whole bunch of white people are building an algorithm, white men, we know inherently some sort of, like, and not even in a bad way, just in a human way, that some sort of bias is going to get built in. And when you AI and the way it kind of generates and keeps growing on its own, that bias, if we're not careful, gets built into the system and gets amplified. So we have to be really careful. But on the flip side, I've seen tools that can help us. So just for people that don't know, Culture Amp it has a platform that's an employee engagement platform, a big focus on employee listening and performance management. We've also recently launched a component around employee development. We see those as three different components. Those tools can be used, in different ways, but I think at the same time, with performance management, there are ways that you can use technology, saying everybody's going to, like, work on the same platform. We're going to be able to sit in a room and look across the board. We can see that 90% of our managers scored within a pretty standard range of deviation, and one manager is completely out of the standard range. Now we can have a conversation, say, okay, fine, maybe you score, naturally score lower, like your 3 is another person's 4. Let's have a conversation. So that way we can, like, look across a group, or say, it looks like men here are getting rated about 20% higher than women across the board. There's a bias in the system. Something's going on, and we can look at that. That's the value and benefit of technology. That we can use these tools to help amplify or highlight things that they're not bad, they're not good, they just are at scale sometimes. And if we're not even aware, and we have no data, no one knows, or says, no, that's not true. So that's the positive side. But on the flip, like we said, these tools can be built inadvertently with bias, bias around ethnicity, regionalization, where you live, countries, all that stuff. And that can be concerning as well, because then we can have a problem that we didn't think about. And we've seen this, that gets amplified over iterations and over years, and then can be hurtful to somebody or to a group. So it's the two sides, right? That we can do a lot of amazing things with technology, but at the same time, technology can also kind of amplify some of the problems or that already exist.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for that, because you've really defined the issue really well, and especially as it pertains to this, to the kind of human resources world that we're talking about. I don't think I've heard it quite like that before. And at the same time, you also told us very specifically what Culture Amp does and how you use technology, which is great. And, it reminds me that I should have asked you at the top, but it's great. I'm glad we got to it.
No worries.
But yeah, I think it's fascinating. And what I'm getting from that answer is really the need for that human analysis, that science, and you wear your label well, because it is a science. And, to be able to take all of that information, take all of that data, and then make informed decisions and be able to then have those conversations, right? You can take technology to a point, and then those conversations that need to be had, well, they still have to happen, and that's not going away, right? So,
Hey, Jerome, I have a story. I have a story that
I
think this is a great place to share a story, but I think
please.
This really captures, I heard our CEO, we were at an event somewhere, and I heard our CEO share this, and I think it really encapsulates this whole thing. And what it shows the kind of the gift of data and information, and also the shadow or the other side of that. And he said, we can use tools like ours. Let's say we run a survey, and it's very easy to see things. We can go to an organization and say, 2 out of your 10 engineers that are men are not happy with your leadership. 6 out of 10 females are not happy with leadership, right? That's a valuable piece of information to know at scale as you're thinking about your organization. But as a manager, if you go back to your team and you have 2 females on your team of 15, it tells you nothing about those 2 women. But if you see, so the flip side is that manager may see that and go back and think, you 2 are against me. You 2 have an issue with management. So that's when we get down to an N of 1, we have to be really careful. So with data at scale, we can learn a lot. But we can also, the flip side is it tells you nothing about any individual. And we have to be really careful, because that's where great data can drive bad behavior.
That's great. That's a great, maybe the word for this whole episode is refinement, because again, you're sort of refining my own understanding of these things. And I think that's a great point. So I wonder, speaking of the work at Culture Amp and what you do, and what are some of and you've given us, actually, this is a great example that you've just given us, but I'm wondering if there are any kind of examples in your experience that stand out where something was going on in an organization, before Culture Amp came in, or before you had, made some kind of an intervention, and then there was, there's a kind of pre and post. Does anything sort of come to your mind in terms of solving a problem that you thought, wow, this is going to be a big one?
There's 2 I'll share. One is a little more kind of a broad story that I really like, and one is very specific around some research we just did. The first one was I was working with a senior leader in the HR function of a very large organization that most people listening to this podcast will know. So it's a well-known, very big brand in this country. And she said, so they started running our surveys. And she said, Craig, I've been going to our leadership team for the last 6-7 years with these issues that I've seen and felt, telling them about it, and they've listened, but nothing's ever really not a lot of oomph has been put behind it. We started running your tools to help us really assess, and the data backed what I was seeing. So I went back to the executive team this year when they were doing their planning for the year, and showed some of these stats that completely validated what she had been saying. So there's different sides of the story. But she said this year, two of our initiatives made it into our global initiatives this year. And I don't, there's so many layers to that. It could be like, the executives, they don't listen. But I think there's more to that. And that's this data and storytelling that these particularly executive leaders, when she could finally put some data to what she was saying, it created movement. So I think that's that merge of data and storytelling, that stories alone sometimes won't move, but when we effectively use some data and story, I think that's the sweet spot. So if anybody listening that's trying to drive change in organizations, are there ways that you can get some data to validate? Because there's also the flip side. People have thoughts and beliefs, and then they run a survey, and the truth is, we call it myth busting. Maybe the people you heard from were saying that, but when you look at across the entire organization, it's not really a thing. So data is very powerful to either validate or, to dismiss an idea or story. The other one, which I think is important, and I did a talk recently, and I included this because there's a lot of evidence that shows all this talk around people want to change but are paralyzed, or change isn't happening, particularly in diversity, equity, inclusion. So we launched performance management tools a few years back. And because of that, we were able to look at organizations that had not run a organized performance management process. So we knew they ran a survey, they had not run performance management, then they implemented our performance management system, and then they ran another survey. And we said, let's just go look at what changed, right? And we had no kind of preconceived notion going into it. We looked across hundreds of organizations. I mean, there was a massive amount of data that we looked at. And what we saw, what was interesting, was because by simply putting in an organized performance management system, the gap between, it was men and women, where not much changed for men, but around career opportunities, around being seen, and like something around leadership, and I have to go back and reflect, basically closed the gap between how male versus female employees felt in these areas. Remember, this is all about their perceptions. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was fascinating because so often you hear people talk about, well, we don't know what to do, we can't do. And now I can go back and say, well, you know what? Like, you don't have to boil the ocean, you have to solve it. Are you running a performance management system? Because we know that if you're thoughtful about that alone can close the gap in many of these core areas between the perceptions of your male employees and your female employees. So I thought that was really fascinating. And there's a couple of these examples of interventions that you might not be directly linked, but if you're thinking culturally and like doing the right thing. I also think it's interesting that the men didn't shift much. It was the women. And it doesn't mean that anything really changed other than them running the system. But those that kind of are perceived to have, it didn't matter either way. But for the female population, that made such a big difference to run a system that seemed to create more equity in the organization.
And I'm sure now with the hybrid working situations and more virtual, this is even more important to have a framework and some kind of structured process that can help support that. And I'm thinking of some clients that have thrived because of that and moved forward because there was a viable process that was championing them and giving them visibility in the organization.
And when we were all in person, there were things that were subtly happening that we didn't think about, like the sense of being, at least those were together, like things are being seen, things are being felt. There was other problems that you weren't in the office, but now when everybody's distributed, how do you know, and how do people feel? So we often talk about like when you run some of these programs or running surveys, there's kind of the Hawthorne effect of simply just observing, of like people feeling like, oh, you're listening. And when we're all distributed and people have no sense of, is this being seen? Is anything being heard here? What's going on? Even if things are being heard, the perception is just as important. And some of these tools, and I don't want to advocate that you just run these things and don't do anything with it. Mm-hmm. But, being thoughtful and saying, how do we listen, particularly now, how do we listen to our employees at scale, not just a couple of conversations that we're having, mean a lot, especially when they see the organization responding, like, oh, they're listening. And especially as we're distributed and it's hard to put a gauge what's going on. There was stuff we gathered when we were all in person that it's much harder to understand now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm nodding so much my head could fall off because that's exactly what went through my mind as you were describing that example, this closing of the gap. What went through my mind is exactly that, is that, just the fact of it, the fact that you're running surveys, that it's being, we're going to be running these surveys, we're going to do this, we've run the surveys, here's the data, here's what we found, and here's what we're going to do as a result of it. Just all that communication makes a huge difference in terms of our perception of whether our leadership cares or not, about what's going on, whether what's going on in terms of the culture. So yeah, I really agree with it. And I've seen that in practice as well. And I love, just to reinforce this for our listeners, that marriage of storytelling and data that you were talking about earlier.
That was my line I was going to say.
Yeah. Oh, well please, you can take it too.
But it's true. It is a complementary relationship. They shouldn't be exclusive to each other. They bring things to life. They make a point. They make it human. So I think and also you inferred something a few minutes ago about being expedient about taking the survey. We're good at filling them out, but making sure something happens and coaching and having a plan to implement it. So it's, we take it here and nothing happens till, too far in the future, which does nothing for anybody.
One of the questions in our standard, so just so our surveys are all customizable, but we do have standard templates. And one of the questions in our standard engagement template is, I believe something will happen as a result of this survey. It's such an interesting question to use to leverage, but it says so much. And it's oftentimes when we start with a new client, I love that question. Even if the score is low, this is our starting point. This is your trust indicator. So now it's your job. I think a lot of organizations historically are used to just pulling data. What's our sales data? What's our human, what's our pipeline on talent? What's our surveys are a little different. They send signals. And when, and I've asked an audience, like, raise your hand if you've ever taken a survey and never heard anything back, and like how did that feel? Like, so it's really important because you can undermine the entire process. If you run surveys and do nothing, or people perceive nothing was done, you will have the inverse impact that you're hoping for. If you run a survey and pick one or two things and just go back to the organization, say, here's why we picked these two things. Here's what you're going to see and what you'll see following up. And then you look at that question, that question about, I believe something will be done, watching that move. It's a really critical question. And so, I'm happy to call that out now, because I'm scared that I've talked a lot about the impact of simply doing it and what that does, but I just want anybody that listens that's interested. If you do these things and don't follow through, sometimes you can have the inverse impact around that. So it's really critical. It's not just the survey, it's listening. Listening is getting the information, processing it, and going back to the sender and saying, here's what we heard. Are we correct? And that relationship is where people feel trust and safety. If you're just asking, nothing's happening, people start to not trust or feel like it means anything at all.
Right. And you're creating accountability, right? And I think once there's accountability and people see it as that, then it's like, oh yeah, these people are walking the talk, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm looking at the time and we could go on and on, because this has been really fantastic. And thank you so much for all your insights and these great examples. So I want to go to a question that we ask of all our guests, which has more to do with a personal experience or your own background. And the question is there an experience that's shaped who you are today? And could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
There's few.
I would imagine.
There are a few, I can imagine, right? But there is one, and we've hit on it. So I'll go back. And that was about, probably 12 or 13 years ago. I was in my mid 30s, and I think again, like I said, I had adversity early in my life. So a lot of it was figuring it out. I was on my own in the world and trying to figure it out. And I got to a place where I wanted to be in California, and I wanted to, and I kind of done all the stuff. I had a family at this point and young children, but was kind of missing something, and I decided I wanted to go. I just knew people that had gone to retreats or gone to a thing. And some people I know, I'd heard about people talking about, they've been part of a men's group, or and I knew of this weekend. I knew nothing about what happened there, but it was a men's weekend. And I went to this retreat, and it was great. I mean, the weekend was amazing, very powerful, and opened my eyes to a lot of things, also about my relationship to myself and my relationship to other men, which really had, I think as a man, had a very powerful impact. But they said at the end, this weekend's great, but like anything, if you just go back about your life, it'll kind of dissolve away. We have, this organization happened to have a network of men's groups around the globe, around the country, and said, find one, continue to do this work, to be, in a group of where you can be open and honest, and it's very structured. It wasn't just sitting around talking, it was structured. I came back home, I didn't find one, so I started one. But that circle is still around today. I was part of it for about 10 years. And the reason I share that is because I think it helped sitting in a men's circle and having a regular opportunity to have people reflect to me what they're seeing, to feel safe, to not get stuck in my own story without the reflection of others. And a big part of that was purpose. I mean, that's where that whole purpose. So I was struggling a lot professionally and finding my way, and I was chasing titles or what it meant to be a man in the world. And I think it was in that work where I got some honest feedback, some honest reflections, some people that helped me shape and shift some of the narrative that I was holding that was off. And that that's where I got clear my purpose. At the time, it was to help the world work better by improving the places we work. What you'll hear me say now is how we work, because I think places is a little shifted. It's post-COVID. And I share that story because, I mean, anybody can find their way however they want. I think there's two things. One is, if you try to do it alone, we can get lost in our own stories. So I think we need each other for the reflection and for the opportunity to, as long as we can create safe spaces, but be honest with one another. And the second piece is giving me the space and to really like develop what am I here to do when it's all said and done. But that purpose statement has, when I could go into a job interview, when I could look at somebody in the eyes and say, here's what I'm here to do. I don't care what title, call me a people scientist. Maybe I'm building community today. Maybe I'm a people scientist another day. That doesn't really matter. Those are all just vehicles that are helping me move towards the purpose. So I think that was a really powerful shift for me. And there's a lot of other tangents. I mean, like, I spoke at South by Southwest twice now. One was around how do we around masculinity and leveraging story to help kind of open this perspective of what masculinity means. But so much has come from that. But I think professionally was a real shift for me. And I think the piece was, creating that space and having somewhere where I can get some honest reflection, that I could not get stuck in my own story or just be surrounded by family or people that only said nice things, that it was an opportunity. And then to get clear on purpose and to move from purpose versus some sort of idea of achievement, or I need this, or I need this trophy, or I need that. The trophy is, can I keep advancing and helping the world work better?
Well, thank you, because on behalf of myself, and I'm sure the listeners, when I was doing my homework and reading about you and listening to your podcast, that was one of the pieces that I was most curious about. I know you did really good with data and surveys and all that good stuff, but this was one chunk. There's other questions, but thank you, because that was like a moment when I was listening to that and reading how you decided to embark on take that as an initiative for yourself. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it really, again, I mean, now, there's all these thoughts and reflections that I'm having around purpose and just the important, I think what you've just kind of shared with us, it just again highlights the importance of being able to say just in one sentence or two sentences, what that purpose is. And I think you've also highlighted that it's not easy to get to that one or two sentences. I mean, you put in a lot of work to get to those two sentences, right? Or that one sentence. And so I think, but it's worth it. It's worth, that whole process of discovery and self-discovery that you went through.
I'm really happy you called that out too, Jerome, because whenever I share that, I'm always scared that it might be like to somebody maybe in their 20s going, oh, really? So easy? Just find your purpose? No, I think there's a lot of hard work that might take you 10 years to do that. So focus on that as your journey. But I always want to be careful not to like make it sound like, oh, it's so simple. Like that was a ton of work and a ton of self-discovery and growth. And your purpose isn't what you want it to be. I want to be an amazing guitarist and musician, like, but I think when I got honest and just did those self-reflection was like, but this is what's coming to light in my world and where all my skills and my passion can merge. So it was almost like you need a little bit of experience to help define that. And it's not what you want it to be. Sometimes it is what it is. And can you just move from that place?
Yeah, it's powerful, really powerful. Well, thank you so much. This has been just a real pleasure and such a stimulating conversation on a today. The day we're recording is a Friday, so great way to get into the weekend. Thanks so much. And I just maybe Craig, are there any resources or websites you want to point people to in terms of learning more about you and Culture Amp?
Yeah, there's two.
Okay.
One is cultureamp.com. At a high level, we share a ton of resources, the blogs, the articles. We've always been really big. So if this topic is of interest to you, organizational culture, go there, poke around. There's a lot there. But I also want to point out, if you want to go one step deeper there, the community tab, because we have built a community of people around the world that are both meeting in person and virtually. I'm so blown away by how many people really are inspired by this topic and want workplaces to be together and don't know there's others around them. And that's why we built this community. And it's for anybody that believes a better world of work is possible and willing to do something about it. Go there, look at the events that are coming up. They're both virtual, and maybe you have a local chapter or you want to start one, we can help you. So that's on that side. On the flip side, I'm a LinkedIn guy. So please, go to LinkedIn. I love to connect. I try to share what I can there. And if anything else comes out for me, I'll usually push it out there. So connect me on LinkedIn. The only ask is send me a note. Let me know that you heard me here. Don't just say, invite. Like, send a note. Let me know why you're reaching out, so we can connect there and have a direct line of connection. And you can hear just what I'm thinking about, what's going on.
Terrific. Thank you.
Great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks. And as always, we will make sure to link to all of these resources that you just told us about, including some of the things that we talked about in our conversation that people can go and dig deeper in. That will be part of the show notes when the episode is released. And as always, our listeners can visit our website, narrative.com, for more information on all of our various resources ourselves, the podcast, the blog. You can find everything there, and more information on how you can find, craft, and present the stories that are going to engage your audiences like nothing else has before. We're always happy and ready to listen to you. And once again, I want to just thank my co-host Julienne for being here today, and thank you, Craig Forman, so much for being with us. Really fantastic conversation.
It's an honor, and I really appreciate it. Thanks for asking me to be here.
All right, you're welcome, and we will see you next time.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.